Good evening. I welcome all the guests and those who join us remotely through the Zoom platform. This is a series of events under the name Elephant and Polish Issue. Today's guest speaker will be Professor Tomasz Mroczkowski, professor at American University, at the Business School and Department of Management, and our moderator will be Michał Rutkowski, who is director at Department of Health, Education and Social Services at the World Bank.
Thank you very much and welcome everybody to that event. We have this series, The Elephant and the Polish Cause, which I think is a fantastic one. But what's interesting, typically in this, The Elephant and the Polish Cause, the elephant is only remotely related to the cause of Poland. We often discussed things which were really, it was a stretch to say that there is a connection. Whereas today, it's a completely different situation, thanks to Professor Mroczkowski, whom I will introduce in a moment, because the elephant is the cause, in fact, because we are talking about Poland's economic growth miracle, and there is nothing more Polish in it that it could be. So I'm very happy that we have the event that pushes the concept of the elephant and the Polish cause to its extreme. When it was invented by Stefan Żeromski, it was making fun of Polish people that they always, whatever they are asked to talk about or write about, they always link it to the Polish cause. And in this joke, in the coming spring of Żeromski, it was about the elephant, when only Polish people thought that elephant must be linked to the Polish cause, otherwise there is no point in talking about the elephant. Polish economic miracle. What I wanted to frame it the following way. It is very hard to disagree with that. Almost everybody agrees that it's a miracle. I always reading the economists, Polish and otherwise, that was quite a clear case. The debate is only whether it's called miracle or the success. I wanted to make sure that I'm on the right track. So this afternoon I checked four AI sources. I checked ChatGPT, I checked Gemini, I checked Grok of Twitter, and Claude. And they all agree that there is a big economic success in Poland. They phrase it differently. They debate whether it's a miracle or not, but that is not disputable. What seems to be, however, very disputable is why did it happen? Is it the result of good economic and social policy making, or is it happened just by accident despite economic policy making and social policy making? And there are definitely two camps, maybe not of equal size. And the first camp points to the fact that Polish economic growth was dynamic, uninterrupted. Even 2008, 2009, Polish economy was growing. And this is all because of great macro policy, monetary policy. And this is a huge success coming from good use of European funds. And then the success absolutely unquestionable because not only because of uninterrupted and dynamic growth, but even at the moment, Poland is at 3.7, 3.9% of growth annually compared to 1.5 of the European Union. And then those people who would link it to policies would say very wise use of European funds. And that all led to this fantastic situation, 1 trillion economy, and we are about to join G20. But then there is another group who would say, yeah, that's true. It's hard to question facts. But this is despite the fact that Polish fiscal policy is completely out of control, that the deficit is almost 7%, that there is very high debt to GDP ratio, that Polish social welfare expenditures are extremely poorly targeted, and there is a lot of waste, of which so-called famous program 500 plus is an example. So that happened just despite poor policies. It's just because we had luck, because we had European money, because we had this situation that Poles emigrated to UK and Ireland, then brought back remittances, knowledge, they returned, and the gaps in the Polish labor market were filled by immigration from Ukraine, which was a lucky coincidence for Polish economy. That's another school. The first school is actually well represented by the, in my view, very interesting book by Marcin Piątkowski, Poland, Europe's growth champion. The second view is represented by Leszek Balcerowicz, who every week in his interview says this all happens despite very poor economic policy. So, how to solve this dilemma? And I think we are extremely lucky that we have with us Professor Tomasz Mroczkowski, because he is the only one, or if not at all, the only one in Washington who, for me, can solve this problem. Krzysztof already introduced him briefly, but I would like to mention a few important facts. Tomasz is a professor at Kogot Business School of Business, has been a professor for 30 years, was a Fulbright scholar, was twice chair of the International Business Department, is an author of around 100 publications in US, Poland, Japan, UK, India, and other countries, was a visiting professor in France and Japan, and then money management matters, so he raised and directed over 1 million worth of grants, grant-based projects from private foundations and US government. So we are very lucky to have him. Tomasz, thank you for joining us, and I give the floor to Professor Mroczkowski.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming on this rainy day. Michał, thank you very much for this very warm introduction. I think I want to tell you why I decided to make this presentation. I thought it was, first of all, a good place to have it, and it was the right time to have it. A good place because, don't forget, here in Washington, we actually have a substantial community of Polish economists, as well as international economists. And Michał and Isa are great representatives of this, coming from the World Bank. So we have quite a number of Polish specialists in the World Bank and in the IMF. So we have a community that really is highly qualified to comment. And of course, not only to comment, but the IMF continually monitors the Polish story. I recently attended the annual Congress of the Polish Economic Association in Poznań, where I met and had an opportunity to talk to a whole range of leading Polish economists. And I want to just tell you the conversation I had with Professor Alojzy Nowak, who is the rector of the University of Warsaw, who I've known for a number of years. Professor Nowak travels around the world these days, on all continents, and attends numerous important conferences as well as various other gatherings. And we're talking about the impact of the Polish success. And he said, look, the interest is tremendous. A lot of people think it's a bit of a mystery how it happened, but there is no question that it has finally having a major impact, is generating major interest, not only among economists, but policymakers, and that goes not just for Poland, but also on other continents as well. So I thought it was interesting for us to have a discussion about trying to understand the extent to which this is a miracle. I don't personally like the word miracle. Polish people love miracles. As you know, we had the Polish Bolshevik War in 1920. It was a miracle on the Vistula. So we were the country that defeated the Bolsheviks in 1920. But I personally always felt it was competence, method, and determination that did it. You know? But we love miracles. We had the miracle of the defense of Częstochowa, and we have the Polish economic miracle. So I think one aspect that my friend Alojzy pointed out, he said, you know, increasingly the people who ask me to comment on this Polish economic miracle want to know, what can we learn from it, for us? These are people from different countries. So one of the things that I would like to suggest, perhaps, is what might be the lessons of the Polish economic miracle for the United States, which is why I'm going to talk a little bit about the competition for growth between China and the United States. I want to mention just to put things into perspective a little bit, the UK. And for the UK, Poland has become a kind of a mirror in which they look at themselves. And here are just a few facts from the British Telegraph from January this year, written up by Tim Wigmore. He says the traditional migration flow between Poland and the UK has been reversed. In the year 2025, until June, 7,000 Polish nationals moved to the UK. Meanwhile, 5 times as many, that's 25,000, emigrated and returned to Poland. And those are not the ones who are leaving Britain. Since 2020, the number of people with UK passports living in Poland has soared from 130,000 to nearly 200,000. So not only is Poland become very attractive as a place to return to, but also a place where not only the Brits but others are migrating. This reflects the optimism. This is why, as Michał pointed out, we're talking about the golden age of the Polish economy. And it was Jadwiga Emilewicz who kind of was talking about that. Just to give you some numbers, in 2000, Poland's GDP per capita, the average economic output per person was 42.7%, that of the UK. In the 25 years since, Poland's GDP per capita has soared to $45,113, which represents 85% of the UK's, and the trend is not stopping there. If you believe forecasts, average household income in Poland is forecast to exceed that of the UK by 2031. And of course, for a lot of British Brits, they get very excited about this. I honestly do not believe in this particular forecast, but it's still exciting to see that we're at a very high percentage of European income at this time. Now, to understand the Polish success, and I'll give you some more numbers, the context is very important. The context is what is known as decline of the West. And it is the bright spot in the economy. It is the fastest growing economy in Europe, actually. And here's what another British author, Alistair Heath, writes again in the Telegraph in January. He says, 81 years after the end of the Second World War, the West European era is finally over. Europe has been killed by welfarism, egalitarianism, risk aversion, demographic failure, overregulation, environmentalism, pacifism, and self-hatred. Britain self-sabotaged by wantonly downsizing the military, promoted rent-seeking above wealth creation, embracing soft and net zero, and turned against British core values. We willingly, writes Alistair Heath, demoted ourselves from being America's junior partner to vassal status. We sought to camouflage our uselessness by preaching about human rights and weaponizing international law. So that is a view from Great Britain. But of course, in this country, we have quite a lively discussion also of American decline. The guy who's written all this up, if you're interested in declinism, is Ray Dalio, who heads up one of the most successful hedge funds. He talks about the cycle of empires from a period of growth and expansion to a period of increasing decline, which he sees also in the case of the United States. How many of you are familiar with Bridgewater's 5 stages of a country's life cycle? It's very relevant. It talks about what happens when countries first are in the stage of growing, being hungry, accumulating wealth, and still trying hard, and then going to the next step where they become rich and lazy and no longer are growing as fast, and they get out of this by borrowing money. A great example of that, of course, is Italy in Europe, whose debt exceeds 135% of GDP. That is a country, everybody who's visited Italy recently and has an eye for detail will tell you that it's a grim, a very grim kind of story with a lot of stagnation, etc. Here's the US arc, 1750 to present. What you see here is how the United States had been developing in the last 250 years, which we are celebrating. And what you see is, in fact, from about the beginning of the century, especially, is the rise of China. So I'll talk a little bit about the competition between China and the United States. Why? How is this connected with Poland? Because a rapid economic rise, such as that of Poland, is not only great for our feelings about the country. Don't forget, Poland was bankrupt virtually by the end of communism. It was one of the poorest countries in Europe for a good while. And suddenly that country emerges as the success story. Well, that has tremendous implications for politics and for national pride and so on. And it is, in the context of Europe, it's worth comparing with the emergence of China and its challenge to United States hegemony. So you can see here on this slide that in terms of certain key determinants, China has actually been doing far, far better. It's growing approximately twice as fast as the United States. And of course, this has created the issue of, well, what's going to happen if China becomes number one? And we need to kind of consider that situation. So apart from the dollar, which is the reserve currency, and from the financial power of the United States, on most other dimensions of power, according to Mr. Dalio, China is forging ahead. Which has created this whole idea of China becoming number one. this the reason I'm talking about this is because, as I said, rapid economic growth of a country, which is changing the pecking order in a particular geography, creates all kinds of funny reactions. For example, on one of my previous slides, I talk about what are the attributed causes of Poland's, Michał started talking about that, Poland's economic success. I examined that, and Michał, you talked about the different viewpoints on this. As I said, I don't like the idea of a miracle. I think it was done fairly methodically. But there is a school of thought, for example, if you talk to the Germans, they'll say, well, it's because of us. Germany is responsible for Polish economic success. Why? Because it's the most important economic partner. Number two, we helped Poland get into the EU. We made a lot of investments and so on. So it's really us. And of course, there's a lot of people in Germany who don't feel comfortable about Poland rising. Another theory that is, you might smile at this, is in the very recent years, we owe the economic growth to the Ukrainians. How come? And this is not an isolated viewpoint. Again, one of the German research institutes calculated that 90% of Polish growth in the last 2 years could be attributed to the inflow of Ukrainian workers who compensated for the demographic failure. So you have that. And of course, even people like Balcerowicz, who was mentioned here, also emphasizes this point, that we owe a lot to the Ukrainians. My own view is that the list of the causes of Polish success starts with determined reforms that were consistently applied. The Polish miracle is just that because it was over 32 years. There is virtually no other country that has been able to sustain levels of economic growth for so long without a recession. I remember talking to my Japanese friends who said, oh, 4%, that is a drop in the bucket. We were growing at 9% for a long time. Poland didn't grow at 9%, but the Japanese surge petered out, as you know, and ended in stagnation. So that's the economic reforms without creating a problem with an oligarchy, as happened in the Czech Republic. This is one of the kind of root causes of Polish success. Some of the other ones include the entrepreneurship explosion. SMEs are a very important engine of Polish economy. About just under 50% of GDP and 60% of employment is SMEs. Again, this was an outstanding effort. And I remember it's attributed to the fact that Polish private economic activity was never completely destroyed by the economies. Private farming was allowed, and everybody, of course, was traveling and trading, you know, on the informal market, and that created a kind of good background for this explosion of entrepreneurship. Then, of course, there was the EU transfers that revolutionized the infrastructure, as well as quite a lot of FDI. There is the Polish National Bank will tell you, if you listen to Professor Glapiński, that idea of not joining the euro, of having a very consistent monetary policy also helped. with the miracle. But again, I don't like particularly the word miracle. I prefer to say this was done with hard work. Hard work was a big part of it. Do you guys know that Poles work the hardest? They work longer and harder than Germans and the Dutch. That's shown in the statistics. Also, a lot of Polish women work. So it's also very much a result of very, very hard work. If you read, I want to show you two books before I go on. This is Marcin Piątkowski's book, Europe's Growth Champion, where he looks at the historical perspective and shows and demonstrates that never in the history of Poland were we so close to closing the gap with Western Europe. Provides a lot of kind of statistical backup for that. He's written another book. Well, he's re-edited the book. It's called The Golden Age in 2023. I think this was done in 2019. And I want to show you another book that is also kind of an interesting commentary on all this. This is a book by Wolfgang Münchau. It's called Kaputt. It's about the German economy, which has been stagnating. The subtitle is The End of the German Miracle. So you have a Polish miracle that's ongoing, and you have the end of the German miracle. By the way, Wolfgang Münchau, who lives in London, makes a prediction. He says by 2033, the Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD populist party, will create a government, and this will be on the 100th anniversary of Adolf Hitler's accession to power. A kind of irony of history. So this context is, I think, it's quite significant. But let's go back a little bit to Chinese growth, and China is number one, and then we will kind of close this and open up for more discussion. So the Chinese, and I've participated in a lot of very interesting trans-Pacific seminars, which were based on discussions with Chinese experts and economists together with some American academics. So I kind of got the flavor of, and there were guys from Beijing there, from Nanking and so on, of the Chinese thinking, which helped me understand a bit and be able to predict. So the Chinese are well aware that their growth is much slower than before. Last year it was 5%, I believe, which is still not a bad result. There are a lot of opinions in this country that we've seen peak China already, and we have to somehow prevent further growth. The myth of China is number one. This is a favorite American occupation, by the way, of who's become the new number one. Do you know that there's an economist called Paul Samuelson who wrote a best-selling textbook in 1961, I believe. In that textbook, he predicted that within 20 years, it's going to be the Soviet Union that's going to be number one. That went away. Then we had Japan as number one by Ezra Vogel. Well, that didn't happen. So what about China as number one? It's very interesting. I'm going to show you a few results of how perceptions and predictions and forecasts have fluctuated over this particular prediction, because it's highly emotionally charged. Can you imagine Americans becoming number two? It's not possible, is it? So you will But anyway, what are the facts? The facts are, according to purchasing power parity, China has been number one already for nearly a decade. But of course, that is not always according to many economists, the best way to measure. So what about nominal GDP? Those are some shares of where we are today according to PPP. So here you have China at 19.3%, US at 15%, already in number 2 position. Then you had a number of projections from before COVID. The pre-COVID projections, such as this one I'm showing you, predicted that actually China would become number one by this year. That was a PricewaterhouseCoopers projection, official. There were several others like that. Here you have the same projections for 2019. Again, there was a lot of anticipation that China would indeed become number one. Here you have some Chinese growth. According to Chinese predictions, you can see they are recognizing that they are going to grow more slowly. They have to change a lot of stuff. I'm actually reasonably sure that Chinese growth will not go much below 4.7, 4.8%. For various reasons we can discuss. So I do not see for the next decade or so, don't forget, the main reason is the Communist Party has full control over the society, so they can control many of the variables to a degree that democracies cannot. Okay, I'll skip that. That's in case you don't know what PPP is, but I think most of us here do. According to PPP, China is already also ahead of the European Union. The question is, what will be the relationship between the EU and China? Now, this is a very interesting one, because here what I've done is I've compiled various projections when China would indeed become the number one economy in terms of nominal GDP. And what you see is it's become a moving target. They keep moving that year into the future. And now some of these projections talk about 2050 or possibly never. But that, of course, was again revised. The beauty of the IMF forecasts is they are regularly revised, every few months, in fact. And what has happened is that the Trump factor, which means the tariff scare, has turned out to be less scary than many predicted, including some of the markets, which actually meant that growth numbers again were revised. So what you have now is a situation where we're now again talking of a possible date of China truly becoming number one sometime in the 30s. So this changes. It tells you about how forecasts can be fickle and unreliable. In fact, some economists refuse to use them. Here are some numbers in case anybody's interested. But I want to mention another aspect, which is power and influence and perceptions. And that's kind of an interesting analysis. Here we have for a while, majority of US population expected over a period of time China to become number one. And that number, here you have that period from about 2010 to about 2019 or so. And that has now declined to about 44%. So you still have a substantial percentage of Americans who expect China to become number one, which of course makes a lot of people nervous. What about the next 20 years? So currently 44% of the US population believes US will be the leading economic power in 20 years. So a minority there. But 37% Americans believe China will be number one in 20 years. So it's kind of a split, you know, a split that is not close to 50-50. And then there are the international perceptions. And here you have, for example, a group of countries, namely Germany and the UK, which consider China as the leading economic power. And there are the other countries that Japan, India, and Canada see America as prevailing. But these kind of show you a number of important dimensions. The unreliability of forecasts, and the importance of the perceptions of power and influence and how they fluctuate. And I think we have to take that into consideration. To conclude this segment on China, there's a famous theory that rise of new economic powers can lead to war. So I posed the question based on my interactions with the Chinese, what should be the three approaches guiding the US-China relationship? So option one, preparing for war. Two, managing US decline and the end of hegemony. And option number three, an optimistic one, would be constructive co-leadership based on the recognition that we have to find some sort of a modus vivendi with the Chinese. Here you have some European projections. As you can see, there are two countries in Europe that are still very actively growing, and that includes Poland and Spain. Spain isn't quite as good as Poland, but it's in position number two. But the rest of Europe, including Germany, is growing very, very slowly indeed. Well, here are some of the issues here, total factor productivity, and so on. I won't get into these technical issues. I want to suggest now some issues for our discussion that we could consider and ask Michał for some commentary. How long can Poland sustain its fast growth in Europe? Educated to grow slowly or even stagnate? Big question. We do have a forecast, which I can share with you. There's an IMF forecast, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Michał, that gives a partial answer, but I don't know if they're correct. Other alternatives to EU membership and eventual adoption of the euro. Number three, what are some of the most important barriers for continued Polish growth? What are some of the options here? Should Poland orient itself towards Germany and the EU, or should it rely more on the United States? Lessons for the West. I think there actually is, I'll tell you what I think is one secret lesson for the United States out of the Polish experience. I think one of the less well understood factors in the and Polish growth is a balance between social development and economic development, something that has gone wrong in the United States. In the United States, we have a fantastic economy that somehow got divorced from society. And I think that is the lesson of success. To give you evidence of that, just look up the Gini coefficients for the United States. And the United States is one of the most inequitable societies with a tremendous and growing income inequality, which generates a lot of the dissatisfaction experienced in this country. Whereas Poland is regarded as a moderately equitable society in terms of the Gini coefficient. Is a very important factor of success. And finally, the last question for discussion would be, as you know, Poland is spending a lot of money. So the question, if anybody has a view on this, is this investment in defense, is it going to have an economic payoff? Or is it just a burden on the budget?
Thank you very much, Tomasz. We got more than we asked for, because in addition to a very clear statement that Polish economic success is a result of hard work and good economic policies, we got a lot of reference to China and to global growth and US and European. I am not a discussant here, I am a moderator. I am planning in a moment to open for questions, starting with those who joined us on Zoom, and then from the room. Before doing it, maybe I thought the concepts Prof. Mroczkowski talked about maybe require some explanation, or if you think the explanation of the question. First, the PPP, purchasing power parity. US economy is larger than Chinese economy, 1.5 times. And Tomasz talked about projections that it may change in the 30s. Once you invoke the level doing PPP, indeed China can be calculated already now as being bigger, except that PPP usually is used when you do GDP per capita, not the size of GDP, because that shows the real standard of living when you look at prices. So I don't want you to confuse GDP, the size of GDP with GDP per capita, and then GDP with purchasing power parity factored in. And the second is Gini coefficient, which Tomasz mentioned at the end. For those of you who don't follow that, if Gini is zero, it means everybody is exactly the same in the world, depending on what you measure. If Gini is one, it's extreme inequality, one person has everything. And Gini is in the 30%, as Tomasz said, it's in the middle of European PAC. US Gini is above 0.4, so it's more unequal, as Tomasz said. The largest unequal country in the world is Republic of South Africa with Gini of 0.57. And in general, countries in the neighborhood in South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, follow the PAC with 0.55, 0.53. Just two technical things in case you were interested. And now my intention is to open the floor and invite questions.
Good evening. Thank you very much for such a excited for me lecture. You talk about in China, you talk about Poland, USA. I was in China doing business in export-import, and I observed what's going on over there. and why we, European Union, United States, as well as other countries, make a big mistakes on export-import. When I was negotiated with table, what they say to me, we want to sell it you. We want to sell it you. I ask them simple question. I don't do that kind of stuff. I want to go the both side. And you're going to have pay the price. That was 10 years ago, something like that. Indeed, that's what they try to do. That's what they do. Now, when you mention about Poland, economy growing up, and why this happened in Poland, you say beautifully say labor. The most educated in anywhere is Polish labor, from technical to industrial. What United States making mistakes, my observation, what European is making mistakes, except Poland does not make the mistakes. Service economy kills any country. Because service economy is based no industrial productions. When the industry is lost, there is no progress of expansion and growth. Service economy never do it. United States is the biggest service economy, which will lose and is losing middle class. And you know it, without middle class, there is a so despised gap. My question to you, what you would advise Polish government, or Polish, whoever, even US government, what you will advise to them about the service economy and why doesn't work and what you're going to do about the middle class, which is disappearing in our front eye.
Thank you. I will not let you to. I asked you to hold your fire and we group questions into 2 or 3. Any other questions from the room? Please.
Good evening. Thank you. Just maybe it ties in with what the other gentleman was saying. As far as like a preponderance of focusing on service economy in the United States, if Poland is facing its own demographic challenges, as is its trading partners, is Poland investing in AI and automation to compensate for that, or will they be seeking bringing in skills from abroad?
Given the high quality of questions, I plan to only allow for one more before getting back to Professor Mroczkowski.
Thank you.
And that you are not introducing yourself. I noticed, so yeah.
Michał Rutkowski, thank you for giving me the mic. In fact, I have 2 questions. The first, pretty easy. You often travel to both the UK and to Poland. Do you really see the advantage of quality of life in Poland over the UK? Could it be seen with a naked eye by a visitor? And then the second question is probably more a comment than a question. Today I happened to read a summary of a survey, actually in Gazeta Wyborcza, of foreigners living in Poland. And there are only 60,000 European Union members living in Poland. When they were interviewed about what they like, dislike in Poland, why they decided to live in Poland, interestingly, the prevailing point was that Poland has very advantageous labor code, which makes working in Poland much easier, more pleasant. Working hours are defined. Nobody works after hours. It's basically for somebody coming from the established capitalist economy, a much easier place to work and enjoy life, which is somewhat contradictory to a statement that Poles work really hard. Maybe they are just more efficient in the hours they spend in their workplace, but given the survey, it's not seen by the foreigners. Thank you.
Ask the questions, so I'm sure you enjoy them, Tomasz.
You also have questions. I don't always have answers. So, how big should the manufacturing sector be? Can you afford to have a service or service related economy? I spent a whole year at the Frankfurt Institute in Germany. Frankfurt Institute is the kind of a big applied think tank that services the German industry. It was an interesting time, and one of the things I learned that the British were very alarmed. They visited Fraunhofer all the time to find out how can they restore manufacturing. You know, can Fraunhofer help them, because they believed their manufacturing sector was already declined so much that that became a danger to security and the economy. And they have been at least trying to, if you like, rebuild. Don't forget, Britain's manufacturing was leading the world up until about World War I. Up until World War I, when this best-selling book appeared in the UK, it was called Made in Germany. It was discovered that the Germans could make almost everything the British could, but better and cheaper. It really shook up the British. Anyway, that debate is coming back, and we have a debate here in the United States, as you know, where the administration has been trying, at least, to bring back some of the manufacturing back into the United States. I don't know what the present judgment on that is. There have been a few success stories, some foreign investments here, including by such companies as the BASF from Germany and so on and so forth. So it's an ongoing debate. I wonder what you guys think about. There are some economists who think, well, it doesn't matter. You can just have services as long as you have open trading policies. Others say, no, we found this out during COVID, right? When we found out that certain key, say, medications and pharmaceuticals were just not available. So for just in terms of security, I think that one does have to have a minimum manufacturing sector, and Poland has a fairly large manufacturing sector, actually, compared to the Anglo-Saxon countries, not as maybe as large as in Germany, but it does. So, which brings us to the next question of what about AI? That was your question. Yeah. Yeah. China does, definitely. Nobody knows, of course. I do know that a lot of countries are achieving outstanding results in IT, in programming, even in drone technologies. So I think the capacity to succeed to some degree in AI is in the country, and there are programs oriented towards that. So no reason why not, but we don't know what that AI revolution is ultimately going to mean. We in the United States, we're the biggest spenders, and even the geniuses they're not sure well, this is just a bubble. Is this going to be a success? But it is a key factor of hope in terms of, quote unquote, beating China, This was supposed to be the way in which the United States would restore its competitiveness, its productivity, and so on. And I just don't know if we're going to succeed or not. I mean, there are different. I've read very different reports. Just like if you start analyzing the different so-called China experts, what they think, you'll get all kinds of very different answers. They're kind of split between the China enthusiasts and those that see China basically as a country that would be forced into decline because of the key technologies from the United States and the chip-making power of that. Quality of life. It's a great question because both our families have children who live in the UK, don't we, Isa? So we're watching that. My son lives in London with his family, as does Michał and Isa's daughter, so we keep comparing that. I think it all depends. You can have a fantastic quality of life in the UK if you're in the right income bracket. Whereas, again, thanks to some of the issues you pointed out, maybe that quality of life circulates a little bit further down. In the case of Poland, at least we hope it does. My overall impression of Poland, I visit Poland quite a bit, and my impression is that it has indeed improved tremendously in the last 10 or 15 years. It's clean, infrastructure is better and better. Digitization is quite advanced. So I think that some of that momentum of progress it hasn't petered out.
Thank you. I'm planning to open for the second round. You encouraged views on manufacturing, Tomasz. So I just wanted to say that obviously so many countries, as you pointed out, benefited from this stage in which manufacturing really accelerated their growth. I think the dominant view here is that this is, however, a matter of the past. It is not going to happen again. So that's where the search for success in services comes from. India will never do what China did in terms of having manufacturing base that so much elevated China. And then for those who are skeptical about the possibilities in the future of manufacturing being an engine of growth, the favorite comparison is Singapore versus Malaysia. Malaysia's industrial base is far bigger than Singapore. Singapore is essentially a service economy, and Singapore is one of the best successes in the world. So I think you are definitely right historically. When it comes into the future, that is more complicated because certain things cannot happen again given how the industries develop.
Thank you. My name is Guadalupe, and I appreciate all the presentation. Well, I can say congratulations to Poland because I have the opportunity to go there just at the ending of the communists, and I learned all the history, how many years they were under control, and they unified themselves to fight and get the freedom, and they demonstrate right now how the freedom is for them to grow. I come originally from South America, where we have been, by history, conquered, but Europe takes so many things from us now. We will try to follow the example of USA and to improve the factories in South America. We will try to buy machines from Europe or USA. However, for South America, it became so expensive. So we started to buy, let's go say, machines, sometimes a second-hand machine from China. But the Chinese were so clever that when they found out South America, we needed those machines, they took over the control of the Canal of Panama. So they were coming with containers, and then they came with themselves to come and sell in South America. Now, The machines are stuck in there. Now they bring all the goodies to South America, dump it there, everything. So the people are losing jobs. You, as a professor of the university, what is the guidance? What is the message you can provide to South America to improve, to go up, so they cannot come through the border or anywhere, not only USA, in Europe, everywhere, looking for any kind of job because they cannot find it?
Thank you. There is one more question before I come back to you. This question is very interesting. It goes beyond Professor Mroczkowski's terms of reference for tonight, but I'm sure he will enjoy answering.
Hello, thank you so much. My name is Kamil. One thing I want to ask is, thinking about US, Poland, two countries, and even, in the other examples, let's say in Germany, the idea of regional differences, specific regional declines. For example, in Poland, Polska A I Polska B, and sort of the history of, one being less, less industrialized than the other, and that it has repercussions when it comes with politics. As we know, there is, the East and South vote heavily for peace, the West and the North vote for PO, and of course, this is reflective of, the two ideas of Poland, right? You speak to someone who, lives in Wrocław, and everything's, rosy and kind, but you go to, Podkarpacie, and they will, complain every day, oh, how this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, it's getting worse every day. And sort of thinking about the conversations of regional development in, say, Poland, what are your observations? What have you been looking at? There have been a lot of bridging between the two. And then thinking about comparing to the US, right? We have, the coasts, especially Silicon Valley, New York, it's compared to the Rust Belt, with the Rust Belt really suffering from specific types of economic decline, while the US is still growing and also has political ramifications as well. So I'm just curious, what are your sort of observations and sort of insights comparing, regional development, how's that being bridged in both countries, and any other case you might be aware of?
So while carrying the mic back to Tomasz, I just share a reflection on the regional differences. I saw the data recently comparing north of Italy and south of Italy with north of Italy, and south of England with the north of England. And what is absolutely striking is the persistence of differences. They are as big as they were 50 years ago. And this is despite regional development policies applied by both countries. Back to you.
Thank you. Very difficult question. I don't know if I have any kind of advice for Latin America. First of all, South America is a huge continent, and you have a variety of situations there. It's not even regional differences, but national differences. So you have Brazil, for example, which is a huge, very potentially wealthy country, with huge challenges. Then you have countries like Uruguay, and Chile, which have done relatively well. But I do want to make a quick comment how perhaps the Polish history of economic redevelopment after the collapse of communism might just have a few interesting kind of thoughts for Latin Americans. When Poland gave up communism, it was a huge crisis. I mean, most of the state-owned companies were either liquidated or sold, very often to some Western companies became quite predatory and shutting down entire industries that used to compete. Cement is not a bad example, for example, in the case of Germany. So we kind of grit our teeth and said, okay, everything's better than communist economies. We hate that. It's capitalism. The amazing thing about Poland is that there's still a capitalism which has, let's say, declined in some European countries. But in Poland, I said, okay, if it works, and it seems to work, it's great. However, if you look at the structure of Polish economy, it has become very dependent. For example, in terms of trade, chains, it's British, German, and so on. Yes, so the question is, are Polish companies, are Polish capitalism really have capital? Building capitalism without capital. So we had to rely on foreign investment. Foreign investment often means dependence, The textbook answer to that is, well, capitalists are going to grow, more companies will become stronger, buy these back, from the foreigners. But until that happens, tough cookies. You're going to buy and Aldi and Kaufland and Tesco and it is a dilemma we confronted. But how did we try to get out of this? We try to grow new economy sectors, some of which have been successful in the new economy, including services and transportation and so on. So I don't know if that's relevant to Latin America, perhaps. I would love to hear what Michał has to say about that. Let's see. Oh, regional differences, yes. Great question. So there is, as you said, Poland A and B. There is Poland that is divided into the west of the Vistula and east of Vistula. And it's a very different complexion in terms of political support. But also, if you look at the abundance of investments from the West, the number one kind of city from that point of view is actually Wrocław. Why Wrocław? Especially in manufacturing, because it used to be part of the German Autobahn system. You can be German very quickly, so numerous companies have located there. And so it is actually one of the wealthiest and most successful regions in Poland, where you see progress also in terms of innovation, which we have not talked about yet. But for example, our friend Marcin Piątkowski, he has a program for what to do next. And I think it's 5 I's, right? Immigration, investment, innovation. And which one am I missing now? Yes. In fact, what is very interesting, what I like about Marcin's approach is he makes a good point that for most of its history, Poland was not a very equitable society, You had the aristocracy and you had the peasants who were, for a long time, they were dependent and so on. And that has been completely transformed, and Poland is now actually 90% of people are actually of peasant origin. The old elites don't matter anymore. That makes it kind of a uniquely, in some ways, equitable society. But of course, regional differences are still there. You can see it just by traveling from west to east. In the east, it's more conservative. It's less developed. And you have to And as Michał said, they're very persistent, some of these differences.
Thank you. Tomasz encouraged me to comment, so he's trying to draw me into being a discussant. I want to take just one point, because you encouraged me to comment on Latin America, and this somewhat relates to your question about Poland's future. And I give you a very one-dimensional view on that. So in my view, one of the reasons for Poland's fantastic development is an enormous focus on export, growth of export to the European Union. 80% of Poland's export goes to the EU, of which 27% to Germany. Not of which, 27% to Germany, 80% to the EU. And that has been a big source of success. When it comes to Latin America, barely about 40% goes to the United States. The rest is diverse, goes elsewhere. And it is very hard to if you have a superpower next to you, it's very hard to develop without exporting to that superpower. Poland to take advantage of Germany and EU. Latin America may want to take advantage of the US, except that there are tariffs and other barriers. But this is one element. Second element, in Poland's economic developments and political developments of last 30 years, there is one interesting feature, which is that when you look at governments, they were coming from different political orientations, and they were saying very different things about what needs to be done. But then when you look exposed what they have done, it is very similar. So they had a completely different vocabulary to win the election, and then when you look what they have been doing, it is actually a consensus. I would say 70-80% consensus what's got to be done to progress. I am afraid when I look from more distance on Latin American politics, it's different. When you have a shift to the left, actually economic policy shift to the left. You have a shift to the right, economic policy shift to extreme right. I'm looking at Bolivia now, who suddenly become very capitalist country after true experimentation with socialism. So that is one of the differences I noticed, that unfortunately in Latin America, they mean what they say. In Poland, actually, politicians do not mean what they say, and this is a big advantage in my view. Unless there are last-minute questions, either from Zoom or from the room. Yes, there is 1 minute. We go for that before we close.
Once I asked question in Swedish chief economists. I asked him this, what is the difference between communist and socialist and free market economy, which I believe is the best? Can you comment on that?
You would enjoy this question, actually.
Yes, thank you. I was always fascinated by the so-called Swedish model. The secret of the Swedish model is I attended many seminars, including ones given by the Swedish embassy here. They have a very good program at their embassy. Anyway, the first thing that the Swedish economic attaches would have said, Sweden is not a socialist country. So that's the first thing he said. That's often misunderstood. It does have welfare transfers, which are quite generous, have been trimmed back. But, for example, the very services that they provide to the population, they're done by private companies in competitive bidding. And this was known as Nordic capitalism. And you can also look at Denmark. Denmark has some amazing arrangements as well. So that, for me, I find that very attractive. It's a kind of compromise that seems to bring both high levels of prosperity, but also high levels of social security. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, everybody. Exactly. Only the round of applause.